After 1 week of publishing the previous part, you guys managed to surpass the amount of likes I asked for a second part. So as promised, here is the second part of What If The Amazing Spider-Man Was in the MCU. But before we start the video, I did take some inspiration from Channel Awesome's TASM 3 video, which will be very apparent, but I just wanted to give the video that inspired this video a mention. So if you want, you can check out their video as well. And with that out of the way, let's begin. The movie opens on a battle in Afghanistan where we are reintroduced to Flash Thompson, who decided to pursue a career in the military after graduating. Flash and his team are ordered to retreat, but before joining the others, Flash notices that one of his teammates was injured and left behind. So without even hesitating, Flash rushed in to help him out. Unfortunately for him, Flash was fired upon by enemy soldiers. But despite this, Flash manages to get his comrade back to safety, but at the cost of losing his legs. After being discharged from the military, Flash returns to New York, only to be informed by his sister that their father had passed away. After attending his father's funeral, Flash returns to his apartment, trying to process everything that just happened to him. All of a sudden, he gets a knock at the door. Once he opens the door, he is greeted by a man wearing a trench coat and a fedora. "Private Thompson, it's an honor to meet you. What the hell do you want?" "I've heard about your recent discharge. It's very unfortunate. But I am here to offer you the chance to be part of an experiment that could benefit you and other people who are in the same situation as you." Flash raises an eyebrow, seeming both puzzled and intrigued at the same time. "I'm listening." We then cut a year later to Empire State University, where we see Peter Parker moving into his dorm and meeting his roommate, Randy Robinson. Peter and Randy would hit it off pretty well, and he would learn that Randy already knew him since his father worked at the Daily Bugle with Peter. Randy would also bring up the crazy airport fight in Captain America Civil War as a little reference to Peter's previous appearance in the MCU. Randy would invite Peter to a party that he and his friends were going to. Peter would be a bit hesitant at first, but he would tell Randy that he will have to think about it because he just has a lot of stuff going on. Randy would understand Peter, but he would still give Peter the address of the party if he changed his mind. Peter would then decide to give his father a call. Ever since they reunited at the end of Captain America Civil War, Peter and Richard have been in contact with each other. But Richard tries to keep low profile since he doesn't want to attract any attention, especially from Oscorp. Another thing to mention is that Richard would already know that Peter is Spider-Man. So Peter and his father would catch up on what they have been doing for the past few weeks. Peter would mention that he's been dedicating most of his time fighting crime as Spider-Man. Richard would tell him that while he is proud of what he's doing as Spider-Man, he should also give himself time to focus on his studies or spend time with his friends. On the topic of that, Peter would also bring up the party that he was invited to. Richard would tell him that the party would be a great way for him to make new friends, maybe even a girlfriend. The last part wouldn't seem very appealing to Peter. He just wasn't ready to start dating again after 2 years since Gwen passed away. But after thinking about it, Peter would agree to go to the party. We then cut to the Oscorp building where we see Gustav Fiers overseeing the Symbiote project. This is also where we are reintroduced to Dr. Connors, who is the one conducting the experiment. But we can tell that Dr. Connors is not on board with conducting the experiment. Dr. Connors then reluctantly releases the symbiote. The symbiote then starts bonding with Flash as Flash starts screaming in terror. All of a sudden, everything goes quiet until we hear Flash breathing heavily. Flash opens his eyes and is shocked to notice that the symbiote has somehow regrown his legs. Flash lets out a few tears of joy as he stands up. Fiers gives Dr. Connors a smug grin as a way of saying, "I told you it would work." Dr. Connors is fairly impressed by the results, but we can tell that he is still skeptical. We then cut back to the ESU campus where we see that Peter has already arrived at the party. He eventually finds Randy and is introduced to his friends, Carly Cooper and Mary Jane Watson. Peter and MJ would recognize each other as they both used to be friends when they were kids. But then MJ's parents would file for divorce and MJ and her mother would move away from Queens. Peter and MJ would start catching up on what they have been doing for the past few years. Peter would learn that MJ had been doing a few acting gigs here and there as well as some modeling gigs. Peter would ask her what brought her back to the city and she would tell him that she wanted to pursue a different career path, which is journalism. Throughout the party, Peter would hang out and get to know Randy and his friends and just having a great time overall. But then one of the partygoers points at a TV broadcasting a bank robbery occurring in the financial district. We cut to the bank robbery where we see a man in a green and white suit levitating out of the bank and shooting energy blasts at the police. The man is about to shoot a huge energy blast at the cops until he is shot in the face with webbing. The police then turn around to see Spider-Man swinging into action. "Oh great, it's you. Hey, nice outfit. I dig the green and white, but it would look better without the fishbowl." This would enrage the man as he would start shooting multiple energy blasts at Spider-Man. "Gee, I wasn't expecting you to be offended by the comment." "Stay out of my way or you will feel the wrath of Mysterio." Spidey would then make fun of Mysterio's name, which would only enrage him even more. But despite his great attempts at defeating Spider-Man, Peter would eventually take out Mysterio and reveal his identity as Quentin Beck. Peter would also expose the fact that Beck's supposed powers were just illusions created by Beck during his time at Stark Industries. Quentin Beck would be arrested and Spidey would swing away. We cut back to the Oscorp building where we see Flash testing out his new abilities. We see that the symbiote has given Flash a look akin to an armored Spider-Man, but he lacked the spider logo on his chest. His stamina, strength, and agility had been majorly improved thanks to the symbiote. So far, Mr. Thompson appears to be the ideal host for the symbiote. Fierce is more than happy to hear this, as his plan is slowly coming together. We cut back to Peter and his dad talking about his latest fight with Mysterio. During their conversation, Peter points out how weird it is that a lot of new supervillains have been showing up all around the city. Richard knows that Oscorp must be behind all of this and it's only a matter of time before they put an end to all of this. Peter brings up the idea of finally telling Aunt May that Richard survived the accident, but Richard would be against this. Richard and Peter then start arguing, but in the end Peter isn't able to convince his father. Noticing that they have arrived at the Daily Bugle, Peter excuses himself and walks away. But before Peter could enter the building, Richard calls Peter over and reassures him that everything will go back to normal once they're done with this. Peter gives him a slight nod and walks into the Bugle. Peter would make his way towards J. Jonah Jameson's office and deliver the photos of Spider-Man's fight with Mysterio. Jameson then gives Peter his paycheck and in typical JJ fashion orders him to get out of his office. As Peter exited the building, he ran into Flash Thompson, whom he hadn't seen since Gwen's funeral. Peter and Flash then start catching up on what they have been doing ever since their graduation. Peter would bring up the fact that he is now working at the Daily Bugle as a photographer, and he would also mention that he is currently attending Empire State University. Flash would tell Peter that he is very happy for him and that after Gwen's death he wished the best for Peter since he was going through a hard time. Peter thanks Flash while at the same time reminiscing about his memories with Gwen. Peter would then ask Flash what he has been up to. Flash would mention his short career in the military, leaving out the fact he lost his legs. And he would also bring up the death of his father. Peter would tell him that he was very sorry for his loss, to which Flash would respond by saying that he deserved it. This response would take Peter by surprise. He knew Flash's father wasn't a great man, but this type of response from Flash really took Peter by surprise. Peter and Flash would then wrap up their conversation as they went their separate ways. We then cut to Oscorp Tower where we see Flash walking up to Mr. Fierce. Flash would tell Fierce how grateful he is that he gave him the chance to test out the symbiote because of how much he improved thanks to it. Fierce would agree that the experiment was a major success, but he also mentions that Flash has to do something for him in order to keep the symbiote, and the task in question would be to eliminate Spider-Man. Flash would be against this since he had always idolized the hero. Fierce would then press a button that activated high frequencies, forcing the symbiote off Flash. "If you don't accept my offer, Mr. Thompson, I will send you back to your life of drinking yourself away in your crummy apartment." Hesitantly, Flash would agree to do the job. We then cut back to Peter where we see him hanging out with his new friends. We can tell that Peter has gotten really close to them throughout their time together. He even talked to MJ about all the stuff he's been doing ever since she moved away from New York. This would include Gwen's death, to which MJ would feel very sorry for. MJ would also understand what Peter was going through because her mother had also passed away around the same time as Gwen. Peter would then receive a message from his father telling him to meet with him at Oscorp. Peter would excuse himself, telling his friends that he has something to do for the Bugle. Randy and Carly would believe him, but MJ wouldn't seem very convinced. We then cut to Peter meeting his father at Oscorp. They both exchange forgiving glances before entering. Using Gwen's old entry codes, Peter and Richard make their way through Oscorp to meet with Richard's partner. Richard's partner is then revealed to be Dr. Connors, who has been informing Richard of the illegal experiments that Fierce has been conducting. At first, Peter is a bit taken aback by this, but Dr. Connors reassures him that he is on their side and is trying to put things right again. Peter's spider sense then goes off as he pushes Dr. Connors to the ground, saving him from being impaled by a black tendril. Fierce and Venom walk out of the darkened hallway, revealing themselves. Rip him to shreds. Venom would then tackle Peter, causing them to fall out of the building onto the streets below. Peter would quickly suit up and the fight between Venom and Spider-Man would commence. We cut back to Richard and Connors where they're being confronted by Fierce. Fierce is absolutely livid, not just because of Dr. Connors' betrayal, but also because Richard somehow managed to survive the crash. Dr. Connors would then quickly come up with a diversion to give Richard enough time to upload all the information about the experiments Fierce has been conducting. We then cut back to Spider-Man and Venom's fight where we see Spider-Man saving people in the ongoing chaos while also fighting Venom. One of the civilians he would save would be MJ, whom he would have a little interaction with where he would almost say her name before correcting himself. Eventually, Peter would become overwhelmed by Venom, ending with him being held over the edge of a building by Venom. Venom would then take Spider-Man's mask off, revealing Peter underneath. Flash would gain some control of the symbiote as he looked at Peter in shock. However, this would be short-lived as the symbiote would take control once again. But before Venom could kill him, a drop of Peter's blood would fall onto Venom. The symbiote would recognize Peter's blood as being related to Richard's, whose blood was used during its creation. The symbiote would then detach itself from Flash, causing him to fall to the ground without his legs. The symbiote would then attach itself to Peter, covering him completely. We would then see Peter in a black and white colored variant of his TASM 2 suit. However, Peter would lose control of the suit and swing away back to Oscorp Tower. Back at the Oscorp building, after uploading all the files, Richard would try and make an escape, but he is then tackled to the ground by Fierce. Fierce would point a gun at Richard, demanding him to return the files. But before Richard could do anything, Fierce is kicked to the ground by Symbiote Spider-Man. Recognizing Fierce as one of its tormentors, the symbiote wouldn't pull its punches and would start beating the crap out of Fierce. Richard would yell at Peter to stop, causing the symbiote to finally stop and turn around. The symbiote would also recognize Richard as the man who experimented on it. But before it could attack Richard, the symbiote would then recoil in pain as Peter started fighting back for control. The symbiote would try its hardest to fight back against him, but in the end, Peter would rip the symbiote off himself. Peter would then lock the symbiote back in its containment unit. He would then go to Richard and help him up before being held at gunpoint by Fierce. All of a sudden, police SWAT units would then start breaking into the building, startling Fierce. This would give Peter enough time to disarm Fierce and knock him out. Richard would then give Peter his mask back and tell him to get out of the building. Peter would obey as SWAT units started making their way towards the lab. Richard, Dr. Connors, and Gustav Fierce would all be arrested. We cut to a few weeks later where we see Peter visiting Gwen's grave. Peter would update Gwen on what happened after the attack at Oscorp. We would learn that because of his involvement in exposing Oscorp's illegal experiments, Richard Parker would not face any legal charges and would be set free. Fierce and Connors, however, would be sent to prison. But Dr. Connors' sentence would be lowered because of his cooperation to expose Fierce. We would also get an emotional reunion between Aunt May and Richard as he finally reveals himself to be alive. Despite all the odds being stacked against me, Oscorp has finally shut down, and there will be no more tragedies caused by them. But that doesn't mean that New York won't need me anymore. New York will always have its friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. The movie would end with a final swing before the end credits start rolling. We would then get our first post-credit scene where we see Gustav Fierce looking defeated in his cell. Just then, his cell door would open, and before he could say anything, Fierce would be shot in the head. We wouldn't get a clear look at the shooter except for his silhouette. Why rely on others when you can do it yourself? The second post-credit scene would show Flash being released from his cell to meet with General Ross. Ross would offer him the chance at redeeming himself by joining his own military unit, with the added bonus of getting the symbiote back. Flash would accept the offer before cutting to black. And that's what my version of TASM 3 would have been if it took place in the MCU. Like I said, I did take a lot of inspiration from Channel Awesome's video, so I'm giving them credit for inspiring this series. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to smash that like button. And if you guys want a third part, let's raise the like target to 30 likes. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.